Taking care of Dad must have been tough, Ramona. I have nothing else for you to do now. Just fill this up. Ramona was handed a divorce paper with her husband's name on it. Her father-in-law had fallen ill, and she had been providing him with the utmost care. She did everything she could to make his last moments comfortable, supporting him devotedly until the end. However, at her father-in-law's funeral, her husband made an unbelievable statement to her, as if he completely misunderstood her efforts and feelings for his father. "What is this all of a sudden?" she asked. With a faint smile, her husband replied, "Didn't you hear? Now that Dad's gone, I want a divorce. There's no reason to stay with you other than for Dad's care. There's another woman I want to live with. I'll even pay you $5 million in alimony, just let me go." How could he hurt someone so effortlessly and without hesitation? Such questions clouded her mind, sinking her into deep sorrow. Of course, the grief was significant, knowing that her husband did not see her as a wife, nor even as a woman anymore. The anger and lamentation towards herself for once loving him and wanting to build a future together stung deeply in her heart. She fought back tears desperately and grabbed the divorce paper that was on the table. Her hands trembling, she began to write her name, but tears continued to fall, blurring the ink with each drop. "Be careful. If the writing isn't readable, you'll have to write it again." Even though she had decided to get divorced, he was still speaking about the woman he once loved with no compassion or warmth. It was clear at that moment that he didn't care about her feelings at all. Yet she couldn't stop her hand, and through the tear-blurred vision, she completed the divorce form. "I, Ramona, am quite an ordinary working housewife. I married Marvin a few years ago, and we have since been living a quietly happy life together. Marvin and I have a harmonious marriage life, where our hobbies and thoughts naturally align, and we seldom have major disagreements. While some believe it's important to clash and deepen understanding, I feel maintaining a peaceful everyday life without strife is also a form of happiness. I thought my peaceful daily life with Marvin would continue unchanged. However, one day, I suddenly received news that my father-in-law had collapsed. Fortunately, he was quickly taken to the hospital and his life was saved. But the doctor found a serious illness in him, and he might not have much time left. I was concerned about his condition and asked Marvin if we could visit his parents' house. It's a tough time with work and all. Marvin declined the visit. Perhaps he didn't want to impose on me, as I was also busy balancing work and home life. While I understood Marvin's kindness, I was gradually becoming anxious that I might have to part ways with my father-in-law forever. One day, amidst these fears, Marvin suddenly said, "I want you to come to my parents' house. You are experienced in caregiving due to your job, and I want you to help with Father's care." At that time, it seemed that my mother-in-law was the only one caring for her husband. But it was a significant burden for her, as she was also elderly. Marvin's sister, Lindy, lived at home too, but she had work and it was difficult for her to spare time for caregiving. On the other hand, since Marvin was working, we wouldn't struggle financially even if I quit my job to focus on caregiving. The fact that my job was in caregiving might also be one of the reasons. I was initially reluctant to quit my job, but given my father-in-law's health and the need for care, I decided to leave my job and take care of him. The reality was that Marvin earned more than I do. If we lived together at my parents-in-law's house, our expenses would decrease and our financial burden would be lessened. Thus, we decided to live at Marvin's parents' house and take care of his father. Once I actually began caring for my father-in-law, I truly realized how difficult it was. Moving my elderly father-in-law from a bedridden state was especially very demanding physically. However, he was a very calm person and never complained about my care. Instead, he always thanked me, saying, "Thank you, Ramona." His words made me feel relatively at ease mentally. Caregiving is greatly influenced by the behavior of the person receiving care, so his character has been a big help. In this life, I had one question. It was about the lack of cooperation in caregiving from my mother-in-law, Marvin and Lindy, who lived with us. Even if they did not get involved in caregiving, they should at least come to see the situation and discuss how they can support. I decided to ask Marvin indirectly, being careful not to sound too critical. Marvin's response was unexpected. "It now takes twice as long to commute to work from this house. And you want me to help with Dad's care after coming back from work? There's nothing to be done for a sleeping father." While Marvin's words might have some truth, there were parts I still couldn't accept internally. I have asked my mother-in-law and Lindy similar questions, and their responses were shockingly cold. "Caregiving is your job and don't meddle in household matters." Especially Lindy, who claimed she couldn't help with caregiving due to work, continued to live in such a way that makes it unclear whether she is really at work or just enjoying her free time. What's more troubling is that Lindy came to borrow my clothes almost every day, saying, "This outfit is lovely." At first I didn't mind, but she has never returned anything she borrowed, and often she loses them. I suspect she might be selling my belongings at a thrift shop. This is because almost every time she borrows something from me, I see her shopping outside. I had never been treated this way during previous visits to my in-laws' home. However, since we started living together, their attitudes towards me clearly changed, and it felt as if they were looking down on me. Maybe there is some issue between my husband and his father that I'm not aware of. Could they be despising me because I'm taking care of my father-in-law? Lost in thought. During my days filled with unease, my father-in-law suddenly spoke to me. It seemed he could sense my worries. Initially surprised and unsure, I hesitated, debating whether to be honest right then. But if he didn't ask me at that moment, I might continue to dwell on it indefinitely. As a result, my father-in-law might start to doubt my feelings and grow distrustful towards me. Thinking it would also be concerning for my father-in-law if I remained silent, I decided to ask him about this issue. "I'm concerned about the relationship between Marvin and you, father-in-law. I wonder if there might be some problem. I don't mean to pry, though." I couldn't bring myself to ask if they were avoiding him, and my words faltered, failing to convey what I intended. However, my father-in-law seemed to grasp what I was trying to say from my vague expression. After a moment of thought, he answered calmly, "There's nothing wrong." "What's the matter?" Pressed further by my father-in-law, I felt I couldn't escape and spoke honestly. "I'm concerned that Marvin, your wife, and Lindy hardly ever come to see how you are. It's a difficult situation to even discuss caregiving." Hearing this, my father-in-law simply said, "I see," and then suggested something astonishing. "How about I pretend to be dead to check everyone's feelings?" I was taken aback by such an unimaginable suggestion and immediately objected. That's not acceptable. It was an utterly unreasonable proposal. If my concerns are wrong, Marvin and the others might be terribly saddened, and it could lead to irreparable consequences. There must be other ways to confirm their feelings. Nevertheless, seeing my father-in-law pleading with a lifetime request, I reluctantly agreed to help. That day, when everyone was at home, was the only chance to carry it out. I repeatedly asked my father-in-law, "Are you sure we should do this?" But his mind was set. With resolve, I headed to the room where everyone was and shouted loudly, "Father-in-law has lost consciousness. Someone come quickly." I felt Marvin and the others running towards us as my father-in-law closed his eyes and held his breath. As they entered the room, I said, "He's not breathing." I was nervous my act would be discovered. The three of them looked shocked and exchanged glances. Unsure of how to reveal the truth and where to say it was a lie, I was panicking when I heard clapping. With the sound, the three of them burst into cheers and rejoicing. "We did it. Dad's inheritance is $5 million. Maybe I'll quit my job with this much money. Dad sure was tough. Make sure you share with me too. I want to buy new clothes. Good for you too, sister-in-law." I was stunned by their words. The three of them were clapping and celebrating. I could not understand why there would be cheers and such reactions to the news of his death. If it were true that he had passed away, maybe I could have endured it a bit longer. Regardless of the emotions and reactions of those left behind, those are things the deceased should not know. Still, it was something I wanted to avoid at this moment. I understand your feelings now. Struggling with his immobile body, my father-in-law sat up and said calmly while staring at Marvin and the others. Marvin and the others were shocked, as if a dead man had suddenly come back to life, and they exclaimed aloud. The surprise was short-lived as they realized this had all been an act. Then, Marvin and the others started making frantic excuses, saying, "Oh, what did we talk about again? It's obviously a lie. We would never seriously say something like that." After that, their glares turned towards me. "Ramona, this is your fault. You won't get away with such a foolish act. You must have instigated Father. Come here." Marvin grabbed my hand and dragged me to the bedroom. My father-in-law tried to explain desperately, but his voice was too weak compared to their loud accusations and couldn't stand against them. If Marvin and the others had truly been mourning his death, I could understand them being angry at what I did. However, their anger was merely a backlash against me for exposing their true feelings. I was deeply disappointed by their actions. In the bedroom, I was subjected to unspeakable verbal abuse from Marvin, and from that point on, the harassment against me began in earnest. I was spoken to harshly whenever seen and faced terrible discrimination during meals. My food was so bad it seemed fit only for animals. I was also locked out in an outdoor shed to keep me away from my father-in-law. The shed was poorly maintained and dusty, making it difficult to breathe. I managed to clean it up a bit to make it somewhat livable, but my heart never rested. It seemed that Marvin and the others were now cooperatively taking care of his father. I wondered why they hadn't done this from the beginning. Yet for them, this was merely an act to regain lost trust. And without that incident, they likely would never have cared for him. After a while, my mother-in-law came to the shed. I thought I wouldn't be allowed to see father-in-law again, so I was taken aback by mother-in-law's words. "Don't think I've forgiven you," Dad said. "Why can't you do it like Ramona? If Ramona isn't the one caring for me, I won't leave the $5 million inheritance to you, so I had no choice." Perhaps the caregiving provided by my mother-in-law and the others was lacking compared to what I, a professional caregiver, had provided. And maybe my father-in-law was trying to help me in his own way. If you mess around again, you'll suffer even more. Just do the bare minimum without saying anything. Understood? Although I couldn't agree with everything, I decided to suppress my feelings and replied yes to not waste my father-in-law's intentions. He was growing weaker each day, and I started to feel the anxiety that we might soon have to say goodbye. It seemed he felt the same, and one day he called Marvin and the others into his room. When Marvin and the others were called, they asked, "Are you okay with concern?" But their expressions and attitudes seemed to betray a sense of inconvenience. Maybe it's just that I can't see Marvin and the others in any other light now. Upon hearing his words, their faces suddenly lit up with smiles. "I've caused a lot of trouble since I got like this. This is a token of my gratitude. I'd like you to accept it. Maybe you all could use it to go on a trip and relax." With that, my father-in-law handed them tickets for a trip to Hawaii. Marvin, my mother-in-law, and Lindy held the tickets and were visibly delighted. Can we really go to Hawaii? Like children, the three of them were excited about going to Hawaii. My father-in-law, seeing their reaction, smiled joyfully but also looked somewhat apologetic as he spoke. "Sorry, but they're only tickets for 3, and one person will have to pay their own way," Marvin replied nonchalantly. "3 tickets are enough. Ramona needs to stay by your side." I knew this, but it still didn't feel good to hear it said that way. Even if I went to Hawaii with them, I'd likely be left alone or treated poorly. So I also responded, "I will take care of Dad, so I won't go to Hawaii." That's right. Lindy said this to me, and the 3 of them went to the living room to start planning the Hawaii trip immediately. Meanwhile, my father-in-law and I exchanged looks and shared a wry smile. The trip was for 3 nights and 4 days, and as planned, Marvin and the others departed for Hawaii. During their trip, a few of my father-in-law's friends came to visit. There were no major changes or events otherwise. Perhaps because Marvin and the others were away, father-in-law often seemed more spirited than usual, and I could finally relax and spend some time at ease. The 4 days passed quickly, and Marvin and the others returned. Their bags were full of souvenirs, but as expected, there was nothing for me. There was a women's aloha shirt that fit me perfectly, and I almost rejoiced thinking it was my souvenir, but that was just a premature assumption. Marvin scolded me harshly. "Don't look without permission." And in that moment, any hope I had was shattered. It seemed that my relationship with Marvin might be irreparable. Carrying this anxiety and loneliness, I continued with my mundane life. Then, finally, my father-in-law quietly passed away. It appeared that mother-in-law and Marvin had already decided everything about the funeral beforehand, as everything proceeded surprisingly smoothly. There was no grand funeral, it was a very modest one, with only a pastor giving a brief address before the ceremony. Several days later, discussions about the inheritance were held, and it was formally decided that all of the inheritance would be divided among my mother-in-law, Marvin and Lindy. I thought there was nothing unusual about this. However, hearing Marvin and the others discuss where to travel next, or how to use the inheritance just days after my father-in-law's death, I couldn't help but think they were incredibly insensitive and cold. Their behavior was truly difficult to understand. Don't they feel any sorrow for parting with him? As I looked at them disdainfully, Marvin also looked at me. When our eyes met, he smiled at me, reached into his bag, and seemed to be pulling something out. Then, he held it out in front of me and said, "Thanks for all your hard work taking care of Dad. There's nothing left for you to do. Just fill this up." He handed me a divorce paper with his name on it. Father-in-law had been ill, and I had continued to provide him with the utmost care. I did everything I could to make his final days as comfortable as possible, supporting him devotedly until the end. There were many difficulties. As his last moments approached, his suffering intensified, and every time I saw his face or his condition, it felt as though I couldn't breathe. When I cared for him, I truly experienced a wide range of emotions. Just a few days after his passing, outrage and anger welled up within me at their ability to speak such words. Reflecting on the past events, I had felt some disappointment towards Marvin's attitude. Still, I had never dreamed that he would be the one to suggest a divorce. I was speechless and could only stare at him in disbelief, wondering if he was serious. "What is this all of a sudden?" My question was met with a thin smile from my husband as he answered, "Didn't you hear me? Now that Dad's gone, I want a divorce. There's no reason to stay with you except for taking care of Dad. There's another woman I want to live with. I'll pay you $5 million for alimony or whatever, just let me go. Were you with me just for your father's care?" Indeed, I used my experience and knowledge as a caregiver to the fullest in caring for my father-in-law. If mother-in-law and Lindy see me only as a caregiver, it's upsetting, but not completely incomprehensible. Being a daughter-in-law, I might encounter such cold treatment and misunderstanding. But if Marvin sees me only as a caregiver, it's too painful and almost heartbreaking. At first, I really did love you, but now I have someone else I love. Understand. I heard that Marvin has been dating Rose, a younger colleague from his office, for several months. That timing coincides with when we started living here. His late returns from work were partly due to longer commutes, but there were other reasons too. "Were you having an affair?" Unable to hide my shock, I asked him. Marvin answered reluctantly, "That's what I'm saying." Don't make me repeat myself. If you want alimony, I'll give you as much as you want. I have Dad's inheritance after all. The moment I heard Marvin's words, my heart felt like it was freezing with disbelief. I was disheartened by the reality that he no longer saw me as his wife, nor as a woman. More than that, I couldn't accept that the person I chose had changed this way. Why did I choose him back then? I forcefully grabbed the divorce paper from the table, holding back tears as best as I could. With trembling hands, I began to write my name, but the tears kept falling, blurring the ink with each drop. Be careful. If the writing isn't readable, you'll have to write it again. An unbearable pain overwhelmed me. Even though I had decided to get divorced, I had loved him when we got married. The words that came from his mouth now lacked any trace of compassion for a woman he had once loved. It was a clear moment when I realized that Marvin did not care about my feelings at all. Yet, I couldn't stop my hand, and through my tear-blurred vision, I finished writing the divorce form. But I couldn't accept a divorce without doing something more. I felt I needed to retaliate somehow. Driven by a strong belief that he needed to take responsibility, I resolved to claim a share of his assets. I thought of this affidavit as one way to do so, and I set the amount Marvin should pay at $30,000 and wrote it down clearly. I said, any amount is fine, yet you set it at $30,000. That shows what kind of woman you really are. You can forgive what I've done for $30,000. Did he understand even slightly how much pain and hurt I was in? He was utterly despicable. Considering everything, there was no reason to stay together anymore, and if ending this could be the best option, I tried to convince myself of that. I had him sign the affidavit and formally secured a promise of property division from him. Feeling relieved that everything was over, I quickly packed my belongings and left my in-laws' home. I then fully realized how much support I had received from my father-in-law, my only ally in that house. Now that our relationships have ended, I would likely never be in that place again. After receiving the property division, I was busy preparing for my new life. Even though it was a fresh start, there were more things to do than I expected. As I was busy, my phone suddenly rang. The name displayed was from a contact I hadn't yet deleted. Marvin. Even though he had initiated the divorce, I picked up the phone, a mix of anxiety and curiosity swirling within me because there was really nothing left to discuss. Before I could even greet him, Marvin's furious voice erupted. What have you done? Where did you put Dad's inheritance? It was something that happened while Marvin and the others were away in Hawaii. Father-in-law had contacted a friend to help with the estate management. He had investments in stocks and real estate and owned a considerable amount of assets. The stories my mother-in-law had previously mentioned about the inheritance didn't seem exaggerated at all. Father-in-law had his friend help organize his assets. By staging that play with you, Ramona, I came to understand the true feelings they have towards me. When I had expressed my concerns about Marvin and the others to my father-in-law, it seemed he already had a vague sense of their feelings. It appears there had been numerous occasions since marrying mother-in-law that he felt this way. Marvin and Lindy, not being blood-related to father-in-law and having come into the family through a remarriage when they were older, never really grew close to him. Perhaps mother-in-law had intentionally influenced Marvin and Lindy to keep them from getting close to father-in-law. However, my father-in-law hadn't imagined such things and had hoped they weren't true. That might be why, feeling the need to confirm the true intentions of mother-in-law, Marvin and Lindy, he decided to go ahead with that reckless plan despite my objections. What awaited as a result was a miserable outcome. Ever since then, I've been continuously thinking about how to ensure that my estate doesn't end up in their hands. My father-in-law began quietly. I can't stand the thought of them freely using the fortune I've worked so hard to build. I want to find a way to really show them. And so began his serious counterattack. The first thing he undertook was using a leaseback arrangement to convert the house into a rental property. With this method, the ownership of the house was transferred to a real estate company, and Marvin and the others needed to pay rent each month to continue living there. Then, he sold most of the stocks he owned and transferred a portion to a trusted acquaintance. He also systematically sold off or transferred other real estate properties, nearly settling all his assets. However, what surprised me was that he gifted me an entire apartment building he owned. Ramona, you were the only one who truly cared for me. You never once showed displeasure and always took care of me. You even indulged my whims. I wanted to somehow share my fortune with you because of that, so please accept this apartment building as a token of my gratitude. I had pride in enduring the harsh role of a daughter-in-law and diligently cared for him. Yet, receiving such a substantial gift as an entire apartment building felt disproportionate. But I had painfully learned through that play that his decisions were final once made. Ultimately, pushed by his strong will, I had no choice but to decide to accept the apartment. There might be some hassles with tax payments and real estate procedures initially, but once those are settled, you should have a steady income from rent. You can decide what to do about Marvin. There's no need to rush telling him about the apartment. It's wiser to assess the situation first. Indeed, his advice was accurate. If I had discussed this before Marvin handed me the divorce papers, I shudder to think what measures might have been taken to seize the apartment. Now, let's return to discussing my father-in-law's estate settlement. Father-in-law began managing the last bits of his cash. First, he secured enough cash from the proceeds of the stocks and real estate to cover the remainder of his life needs, and decided to use the rest for donations and funding charitable activities. Moreover, father-in-law took great care to ensure Marvin and the others would not learn of his plans. He discarded any records that could reveal his funding activities, keeping only the bank books that recorded significant sums. Overall, his investments were deemed profitable, though some had incurred losses. Father-in-law deliberately orchestrated the inheritance to pass on disadvantageous assets, ultimately creating an unfavorable situation for Marvin and the others. As a result, instead of gaining an inheritance, Marvin faced unexpected difficulties. Unaware of his father's scheme, Marvin had boasted to me about paying $30,000, and his mother and Lindy wasted money on credit cards, spending lavishly on clothes and travel. Soon, the account was drained of cash, and bills for rent and debt repayments started piling up. Rose, Marvin's affair partner, sensing his serious financial troubles, suddenly disappeared, leaving him without anyone to rely on. Cornered, Marvin sought to reclaim the $30,000 he paid me as the only solution to manage his immediate troubles. Ramona, I'm sorry. I truly want to apologize for everything. It was wrong of me, Mother and Lindy, to hurt you. From now on, I want to change and treasure you. Can you give us a chance to help you think we can mend things? Honestly, with the apartment I received from my father-in-law, I'm not struggling for living expenses and am leading a fairly affluent life. Returning the $30,000 from the property division wouldn't really affect me. In fact, I have more money than I need. As father-in-law planned, Marvin and the others ended up with almost no inheritance and faced tough economic conditions. Father-in-law's desired outcome has already been achieved, and there's nothing more for me to do. It sounds like you're in a tough spot. How are you managing meals? How are your mother and Lindy doing? When I asked with a concerned tone, Marvin answered in a clinging voice. We're just getting by, but it could fall apart any time. I need your help, Ramona. After hearing Marvin's words, I stated without hesitation, I can't help you. With that, I ended the call. I then set my phone to reject all incoming calls from Marvin, his mother, and Lindy. It's easy to guess what they were thinking. Father-in-law's revenge has been accomplished, and now it's my turn. I wanted to avoid direct contact with them, so I decided to hire a detective to investigate Rose, Marvin's affair partner. It turned out that Rose was married, and I decided to provide her husband with evidence of her infidelity. The evidence I provided was only testimonial, but either her husband was exceptionally capable, or Rose was quite careless. Decisive evidence soon surfaced, and once again, Marvin was forced to pay a property settlement. The situation worsened, and both his mother and Lindy suffered damages. As the saying goes, when the money goes, so does the relationship. Marvin's financial hardships only deepened the rifts between them. Constant arguments filled the house. They became unable to pay the rent, and eventually, they had to leave the house. Thus, they even lost the place for them to argue. It was discovered that Marvin had borrowed money through illegal means to pay off his debts, and he was taken away. Lindy started working night shifts, struggling to pay off her debts. And I learned that their mother couldn't find employment anywhere and was living in a homeless state. It's impossible not to feel that the difficulties and hardships they are currently facing are entirely of their own making and are pitiful.